Are you trapped in your relationship? Are you trapped in a cycle of over-explaining yourself? And has this cycle become something that's consistent day in and day out, where it doesn't matter how much you explain yourself, but your significant other doesn't accept it or doesn't believe it? In today's video, I'm going to explain the trap of over-explaining, why we do it, and what happens when we do it with someone that doesn't accept our truth. Hi there, I'm glad you tuned in today. If you haven't been here before, my name is Berges. I'm the Live Your True Life coach. If you've been here before, I'm glad to see you again. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel, especially if you like these type of topics that I cover here. In today's video, we're going to be talking about why we find ourselves in the trap of over-explaining, okay? It really is a trap because it's almost like we cannot stop doing it. And why is it that we can't stop doing it? Because we've been trained to do it. Okay, that's key. We've been trained because there are relationships in your life that you do not feel like you have to over-explain yourself, correct? But then there's that one relationship that it seems like no matter what you say and how much you say, the other person still doesn't buy it. They still don't accept it, and they still have more and more questions. Okay, so it's interesting because the reason why we find ourselves over-explaining is to prove our innocence, right? Maybe someone was saying that we weren't doing what we said we were doing, okay? Maybe they're questioning what our thoughts are or our motives, right? Sometimes we over-explain to try to prove a point, right? And sometimes we over-explain to just try to be understood. Because in some of these relationships, it seems that we're not allowed to have our own feelings, emotions, and thoughts. And so sometimes we need to explain that, but it seems to be a lot of over-explaining, right? I find that in the relationships that we feel like we have to over-explain, what happens here is that, one, the other person seems to not understand us. Two, they might not want to accept what we're saying. And three, it doesn't seem to matter how much we over-explain, they're not going to accept your truth. So what happens when we over-explain with someone who hasn't accepted our truth? The first thing that can happen when we fall into this trap of over-explaining is that we create more dialogue. We create more dialogue to allow the other person to deconstruct it and ultimately use it against us. Okay, and think about that. The more information you provide can be used against you later on. It might even be used against you in this conversation, okay? So less is better. But the problem is we found ourselves in this program because the other person keeps demanding more information, right? But think about it. You know that the last time you gave a lot of information, it was used against you and it probably didn't feel very good. The second thing that we find when we over-explain is that we over-explain, right? Because we feel like the more we explain, they're going to understand our situation. But we add all this information and all these tidbits in, and they are good to have, but yet we don't take into consideration that the other person has actually created a narrative in their head, right? And that narrative is going, okay? And as you're talking, they're filtering what you're saying with their narrative, okay? And also you don't realize, too, that the way that you're looking at them, your look, eye contact, body language is all being interpreted and filtered through their narrative. Okay, so it really doesn't matter what you're saying. You could say whatever, but they're hearing what they want to hear. Okay, and depending on the way that you're standing and the way you're reacting, you might not even get it. You might not even realize it, but they could say, oh, look, he's anxious, or look, he's trying to hide something based on just movement and just the way that you're looking. So understanding that when you're trying to over-explain something to somebody that hasn't really accepted your truth much in the past, usually it's because they have a narrative of what they think you've already done. And so your explanation doesn't really hold water because all they're doing is filtering what you're saying through their narrative and then making a decision from there. The third pitfall that we find ourselves in is that you cannot change what they already think about you. Okay? When someone is not accepting your truth, and they haven't accepted your truth multiple times, okay, first off, that's a red flag on its own because that means that that person does not trust you really at all, okay? Doesn't buy into what you're saying, but it's interesting that we're still there trying to over-explain and trying to prove. And we'll talk about that at the end of this video. But we can't change usually what somebody has already decided about us. Okay, it's very hard to do that. And anybody that knows that when somebody's made a decision upon them, It's very hard to change that. And so what we're doing is we're running an uphill battle that we're usually not going to win. The fourth situation that I want to talk about in today's video is that because we've overexplained a ton in the past, the other person has a ton of information to use against you if they want to, right? And it's interesting because when you do kind of get past the gatekeeper and they do accept the truth, usually you're going to find yourself in a situation where they're going to gaslight you on something from the past that they know about you, something or an aspect of your life that you're not so proud of, okay? Or possibly lies that you've told them or lies that they've caught you in, okay? So it's interesting. So it's like you might be explaining one thing and maybe they accept that truth then. But if they're trying to get at something, they're going to bring up a point of how you lied in the past, or how there was question in the past, or how you brought up how you acted even before you were even in this relationship, maybe something that you disclosed to them, and how that has significance in the situation now. You see what I'm saying? So taking something that happened a long time ago, bringing it back into the present moment and saying that you're capable of doing that now, okay? So there's a lot of different things that happen here, and there's a lot of possible gaslighting situations. So even if you are truthful and accepted and they accept what you say, it still might not go anywhere, and you might not even get that praise that you're looking for. You're looking for them to accept it, but they might just change subject matters, right? To get you to still be a little off, right? It's like to some degree, subconsciously, they don't want you to ever feel comfortable, right? They want you to constantly be walking on eggshells, constantly worried about what the next conversation is so that you will continue to give them more information. And what's interesting about that is that the more that they deflect on you and ask you for more information, you don't even have time to ask them about what they've been doing. And the fifth issue that I want to bring up when we find ourselves over-explaining is that when we find ourselves in this situation, in this type of relationship, we want that person to believe us so bad, to accept our truth, to validate us, to validate our point, that we're going to go through this pain and agony to get there. And it's interesting because I've realized that our value is not created from someone else's acceptance, right? It's not that way. And so when we're trying to get their acceptance and they're accepting of us, we're losing ourselves in the process, right? So it's like every time we continue with this, we're kind of bringing ourselves down, right? Because we're allowing them to question our truth consistently. Okay, and I don't know about you, but if you take a step back emotionally and you start looking at your other relationships, how are your other relationships stacking up to that? And I'm talking about professional, family, friends. Do you have other people in your life that question your validity, that question your story, that question your innocence? Because I find that usually it's happening in one relationship, right? So how do we deal with this to some degree? How do we get over-explaining and try to turn the ship around? Because I figured that we would come into the situation where we get programmed into doing it, right? Because in the beginning, it seems easy. In the beginning, when somebody's asking you for information, it seems harmless, right? It seems okay. It seems like they're just wanting this information. You're like, okay, yeah, I'll tell you whatever. But over time, it starts shifting and changing, right? And that becomes what they ask all the time. And then they want more, and then they want more. And then they build up another story on top of that to ask you about questions from previous. And it's almost like you're answering these questions to nauseam, right? It's like there's not enough time in the day. And sometimes you might even find the other person following you around, asking you more questions, never happy with what you told them. Okay, so let me give you a couple of tips here before I wrap up this video on some things you can do if you found yourself trapped in this situation. The first thing is to recognize the program, right? There's two programs going on. There's a program of your significant other expecting you to over-explain, and there's your internal program of knowing that you have to over-explain. So in order to stop this program from continuing, one person has to stop, okay? And I'm not saying, oh, go silent treatment. I'm not saying, yell and scream, slam doors. No, we're not doing that. We're not trying to accelerate things. We're not trying to make things worse. We're actually just trying to get to the point and move on, right? So when they ask you a question, you respond in the least amount of words, not rude, quick and to the point. They ask you another question, quick and to the point. But there has to be a time where you shut off the conversation. Okay, great. We've had a great conversation. I'm done. I got to take care of something, or I need to take that call. Or are we good here? Because the interrogation cannot continue. Okay, but you have to be prepared to stop the interrogation. Okay, somebody has to, and they're not going to stop. Okay, so over a period of time, this might seem crazy because some of y'all are like, I've been trying to do this for a long time. But we have to do it somewhere. We have to put the line in the sand at some point, and this has to be a personal boundary for you. And so we're not trying to abandon them or walk out of the room or scare them, but we have the conversation calmly. We communicate the answer. They ask another question, we can communicate. Maybe give 2 or 3, each one, but don't ad lib, don't continue, and then say, hey, I'm good. I'm good. What else do you want to talk about? Okay, that's a perfect, but you have to be consistent. If you start doing this, you can't stop. Okay, so you can't just do what I said to do and work on that and make that work and then the next day over-explain. Because see, each time they have you over-explain, they know they're breaking your boundary. Okay, and each time they get you to break your boundary, you lose power. Okay, and they reap the power. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get more power back and stop over-explaining and limit that communication so that you limit the backlash and also you take that power back. And the second point that I want you to think about is extremely important, is that I want you to ask yourself, how much does it matter that this person accepts my truth? Why have I committed to try to explain to this person so much, but I've allowed myself to let go of my power by trying to explain to them? And this is very important because we find ourselves in this loop, right? Of wanting the person to accept us, wanting them to see our truth, wanting them to see our innocence, but we're doing it at a high cost to ourselves. Okay, and so I want you to think about that. The next time you find yourself in this situation, why do I owe them this? Okay, why do I owe someone that constantly is questioning me as a person? Why do I continue to owe them this information? And I just want you to think about that, okay? Because I want you to explore that. Because it's one thing if somebody's coming to you and very interested in what you have to say, appreciative of you, respectful of you. But I find that if we're in this situation, trapped, we're not in that type of relationship. We're in a relationship where it's very much about what happened yesterday. It's very much based on what you do for that person. And I also find that many times, if not most times, they don't accept what you tell them as the truth. And so just some food for thought. Okay, and I think this is powerful because if you're trapped in this situation, which I do feel that over-explaining in a situation with someone and trying to prove ourselves to someone is a trap, we've got to figure out how to get out of it. I hope this video has helped you and inspired you to think about the situation, see it clearly, right, consciously clearly for what it is, and also a tip of how to offset that and reprogram the situation. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, and also there's an option to join the channel. It has members benefit with some exclusive video content that's not on the regular channel, but we always constantly make video content for the channel because I love doing this and I want to help people understand not only their relationships, but to really get deep and understand themselves. In the comments section below, let me know what you think about this video. And if you can, please share it with anybody that you think needs to hear this information. And don't forget to live your true life.